Hello and welcome to PT and Nutrition Education's e-learning platform. Today we're going to be starting preparation for our examination in the Principles of Exercise and Training unit. Throughout this unit you're going to be looking at different components of fitness, how we train for those individual components of fitness, and the physiological adaptations that occur through those different types of training which we will explore. In addition to that, you'll also be looking at how to organize specific variables such as the fit principle and the sport principle and how that can be adapted to meet your client goals. As you can see from today's lecture, the topic will be strength, and you can see from the objectives that we're going to define strength and the different types of strength that there are, identify methods of training for improving strength, and describing the physiological adaptations that occur through strength training. If you've already completed Unit 1 in Anatomy and Physiology, you'll already be aware that throughout the lectures we expect you to be taking part in the interactive tasks that we provide and also completing any additional work booklets so that you can consolidate the learning in order for you to be better prepared for your exam. So without further ado, let's get cracking on the Principles of Exercise and Training unit. Now, when it comes to strength, more often than not, the definition that you will find in the textbooks actually relates to a specific type of strength, which is known as maximal strength. There are different types of strengths and definitions that are linked to that, which we'll explore a little bit later. But in terms of your preparation for the exam, the maximal strength definition is the definition which we will be practicing and learning. So you can see there that it is the ability of a muscle or muscle group to exert maximal force in a single contraction. Now, the maximal force, especially in a gym environment, is often measured in kilograms, and of course that offers an objective measure of the amount of force that you can produce in order to move a resistance, which more often than not is a barbell or a dumbbell in the gym environment. So you can see here that this is a maximum bench press for this powerlifter. They're exerting all of the force that they have in their pectoralis major, their anterior delts, their triceps. They are using all of those muscle groups in order to exert maximal force and move that bar with the weight on top. So when we're talking about maximal strength, more often than not, we're using this as a 1 rep max, which we can then use to plan our training further down the line. But we'll talk a little bit more about that as we progress through the lectures. For now, identify that the ability of a muscle or muscle group to exert maximal force in a single contraction is the definition that you should be aware of for maximal strength. Okay, so what are the types of strength and how do we train for them? If we imagine strength on a continuum or a bandwidth, at one end of the continuum, we have maximal strength where we're producing extreme amounts of force with few repetitions. But then on the other side of that continuum, we have strength endurance where we're completing many repetitions at a lower weight without the muscle getting tired. So, of course, in terms of those definitions, straight away they lend themselves to different training protocols which must be followed if we're looking to achieve either maximal strength or strength endurance. So if we look closely first at maximal strength, we've identified here some of the training variables and what we must train within those variables in order to get an improvement in maximal strength. So the first one is intensity, and intensity when it comes to the gym environment, any training program that you'll look at should have a 1 rep max percentage in which to gauge your intensity. So let's say, for example, that my 1 rep max in the bench press is 100 kilograms, then I must be training between 85 and 100% of my 1 rep max in order to bring about increases in my maximal strength. So that means I must be training with as a minimum 85 kilograms on the bar in order to get some increases in this particular biomotor ability. Now, intensity and volume are inversely related, meaning that the higher the intensity, then really the lower the rep range. So with maximal strength, rep ranges are between 1 and 6 repetitions. Now, the reason for this is simply because of the muscle's characteristic. If you remember when we talked about muscle fibers, fast twitch muscle fibers, which produce lots of force quickly can not sustain repeated contractions without getting tired very quickly. So although the rep ranges there are between 1 and 6, really we shouldn't be able to go above that if we're training at such intensities anyway. Hence why we identified that intensity and volume are inversely related. Sets, it's well proven now within the scientific literature that if we're looking to improve strength, endurance, or indeed hypertrophy, then that is better achieved through multiple sets versus single set protocols. The rest periods are between 3 minutes and above. So if you remember going back to muscle physiology, when we've done something explosive and we've used the ATP PC system or the lactic acid systems, which are anaerobic, then we need a good 3 to 5 minutes in order for those fuels to be resynthesized in order for the next set to be as strong, forceful, and powerful so that improvements can be continued to be made. So 3 minutes plus really lends itself to the physiological characteristics of the muscle in order for maximal strength to be achieved. The exercises that you do generally lend themselves to compound exercises, so this means that we're using large muscle groups and a multitude of them. So in the squat, for example, we're using the quadriceps, the hamstrings, the abs, the latissimus dorsi, the trapezius. This is a compound exercise which innovates a lot of muscle in order to complete that movement. So if we're lifting really, really heavy weights, then of course intensities of 85 to 100%, then we're going to need multiple muscle groups in order to shift that weight. So maximal strength does lend itself to compound exercises. And the test which you can do in order to find out your maximal strength and then use that as a gauge in which to plan your training should be the 1 rep max. So this is the amount of weight that you can push or pull in a particular exercise. Once you have that information, you can then design your training program using those training variables in order to bring about the response that you desire. So if we look at the other side of the continuum, when we look at strength endurance, first of all, if we define it, it is the ability of a muscle or muscle group to contract repeatedly without fatigue. So this is very different to maximal strength now. We're trying to get as many repetitions as we can without the muscle getting tired. So of course, this is going to lend itself to a completely new set of training intensities and volumes in order to bring about increases in this particular biomotor ability. So let's have a look at those. If we look at the intensity, then we should be between 30 and 60% of our 1 rep max. As we mentioned, intensity and volume are inversely related, so the lower the weight, therefore the more repetitions that we're able to do. Now, if we're going for endurance, it is generally recommended at least 15 repetitions on a particular weight will bring about an endurance response. So here we're innovating type 1 muscle fibers. We're putting the aerobic respiration, of course, using oxygen to the test, and we're also using mitochondria in order to resynthesize ATP. So therefore it lends itself to increased training times during those sets and reps. As we mentioned, multiple sets are superior when we compare them to single sets, so it's always worth throwing in 2 to 5 sets on a given exercise. The rest that we complete, really what we want here is the muscle to be challenged when it comes to fatigue. So the less rest that we have, of course, this is going to increase the intensity of the exercise and therefore potentially increase the strength endurance as an adaptation. Now we can use compound and isolation exercises. So a compound exercise, as we mentioned, is using multiple large muscle groups simultaneously, whereas an isolation exercise where we can isolate a particular muscle, such as the bicep brachii, in a isolated movement, such as a bicep curl. The test for strength endurance, we can do any kind of repetition test, but generally within the sports science literature, a 1 minute press up and 1 minute sit up test is seen as the industry standard when it comes to identifying our capabilities and strength endurance. Okay, so if we've got maximal strength at one side of the continuum and then we've got strength endurance at the other side, what resides in the middle? Now we have got other types of strength, and these are known as static strength or ballistic strength or explosive strength. But in terms of identifying these for your level 2 examination, it goes slightly beyond the scope of that. So I do encourage you to research them. However, we will do explosive strength when we talk about power and the skill related components of fitness in a later lecture. However, when we're looking at a continuum and we have identified 15 reps plus, 1 to 6 reps, and those respective intensities, you'll often see something that is very popular within the personal training community, and that is how to improve muscle hypertrophy. Now, muscle hypertrophy isn't a type of strength. However, when we look at training protocols and we see these protocols here of intensities and volumes and these here, it's generally accepted within the training community that muscle hypertrophy resides between these two volumes and intensities. So in order to bring about an increase in muscle size, which is what the word hypertrophy means, then we should be in a middle ground between maximal strength and strength endurance. So it's been generally accepted within the bodybuilding arena that muscle hypertrophy resides between these intensities and volumes of maximum strength and strength endurance. So if we have a little look at those, it's accepted that intensity should be between 60 and 85% of your 1 rep max. Now, because those weights are now slightly lighter, still training relatively heavy, it now allows for more reps to be completed. So between 6 and 12 repetitions is generally seen as hypertrophic rep ranges. And of course, if these are done over multiple sets, then we're creating more muscle damage, so that therefore the muscle is going to grow back bigger and stronger just through simple adaptive processes. So that hypertrophy can occur. Now, of course, this is sound thinking, and repeated bouts of training over time will induce an increased muscle hypertrophic response. However, it has now been researched quite thoroughly by a researcher known as Brad Schoenfeld in the United States of America, and he's looking extensively into hypertrophy and what causes it in terms of intensities, volumes, types of training, and so on. So what was once previously thought of in the bodybuilding community and as well in the personal training community is now been flipped on its head. So we don't have to train with these specific intensities and volumes in order for hypertrophy to occur. So what some of the researchers really elucidated is that we don't need to train between 6 and 12 repetitions and specifically between 60 and 85% of our 1 rep max if we want a hypertrophic response. If we do 5 reps of a particular exercise, that doesn't mean that we're going to miss out on hypertrophy. And by the same token, if we're doing 13, 14, 15 reps, that all of a sudden we've skipped onto strength endurance. We can exercise and we can train across different volumes and intensities and still get a hypertrophic response. So the old school dogmatic thinking relating to muscle hypertrophy and the volumes and intensities related to that have now been pretty much blown apart by some of the new age researchers looking at muscle hypertrophy. So if we just look at some of the studies relating to muscle hypertrophy, and these are certainly not exhaustive, and I do recommend that if anyone is interested in muscle hypertrophy, that you do your own research and explore this topic, because there is now so much new data out there really talking about how we can facilitate hypertrophy and optimize it as well. So as I said, authors such as Brad Schoenfeld are leaders in this area, so please do have a look at them. So if we just look at some of the studies you can see here, it was proven that muscle mass gains were similar between groups that trained with 30% of their 1 rep max or 80% of their 1 rep max if those sets and reps were performed until muscle failure. Okay, so the muscle mass gains at the end of the study was the same whether we trained with heavier weights or lighter weights. However, with that being said, if we're looking to improve strength, do we need to train with heavy weights? And absolutely the answer is yes. And by the same token, if we want to improve endurance, do we need to train with lighter reps and lighter weights and more repetitions? And absolutely, the answer is yes. However, as we've mentioned, when it comes to muscle hypertrophy, we can train with lighter or heavier weights. Of course, one of the byproducts of training with heavier weights is that you will get stronger as well. So it does make sense that maybe in certain circumstances that we should be looking to improve not only mass and size, but also looking to improve strength as well. So the new hypertrophy continuum, as you can see, that old age thinking of 1 to 6 reps to increase strength, and 8 to 12 reps to increase muscle, and 15 reps plus for endurance. Now we know that if we're looking to build muscle, we can train within any of these rep ranges and still get hypertrophic responses. Now, this is where periodization of training comes into play. And do we just train in one particular rep range now for the rest of our lives if we have certain aims that we're looking to achieve? No. And periodization of training goes way, way beyond level 2 scope of practice. However, this is just organizing your training volumes and intensities in order to bring about a peaked response, whether that be bodybuilding, whether that be strength, power, speed, whatever that may be. So we should look really as a method of periodization, varied training, to be including all rep ranges and all kinds of 1 rep max intensities across your training. Now, what is it that governs muscle hypertrophy? And Brad Schoenfeld came up with 3 key factors which determine muscle hypertrophy. The first one was metabolic stress. So in order to induce metabolic stress, here we're talking about an increase in some of the byproducts within the muscles. So here we're talking about lactic acid or lactate buildup, hydrogen ions, inorganic phosphate, all of these metabolic stressors which occur when we train with high rep ranges, shorter rest periods, and essentially when we're training for the pump. So anyone that is well versed within bodybuilding training will have heard of training for the pump before. Number 2 is muscle damage. So as we mentioned in the previous slide, if we're inducing muscle damage, then the muscle is going to grow back bigger and stronger in the subsequent exercise training sessions, given that we rest and get adequate nutrition. So in order to induce muscle damage, we can do negative training where we take the weight down really slow on the eccentric phase, which leaves more time under tension and therefore causes more muscle damage. Full range of motion on the exercises that we do, so the muscle is trained to its full length, and therefore we're creating more damage across all of those fibers. And of course, if you've ever tried a new exercise or a new stimulus, then you'll know that you'll potentially get some sore muscles the next day. So new stimulus and varied training, like we've just mentioned, is also a contributor to muscle hypertrophy. And the last one is mechanical tension. So here we're talking about overloading your exercises and intensities over a number of weeks, hence periodized training. Increasing the mind to muscle connection, so actively thinking about the muscles that you're working. And of course, lifting moderate to heavy weights. Like we said, one of the byproducts of lifting heavy is that you will get strong and you will get big at the same time. So there aren't too many people that aren't interested in those type of adaptations. So metabolic stress, muscle damage, and mechanical tension were identified as those key variables when it comes to muscle hypertrophy. Of course, when it comes to you as the personal trainer and you're looking to help a client achieve muscle hypertrophy, then of course there are so many exercise variables now which are in your hands in order to play around with to bring about those responses. So here we're talking about what order do we do our exercises in and why, how often are we training in terms of training frequency, how often do we take that training until failure, do we do this every set or do we do this sparingly? I certainly recommend the latter. Are we resting? Are we causing metabolic stress with a reduced rest period? Or are we trying to increase strength by allowing creatine phosphate to resynthesize? and also volume load. So this really relates to how much weight we're lifting, which is the load, and how many repetitions we're doing over the course of a week or indeed a full training session. Now, as I've mentioned, if you are interested in muscle hypertrophy, then I do recommend that you go and look at some of those training variables in your own time. And as you can see, here are some of the research articles relating to hypertrophy, and just a few ideas just to get the ball rolling if you are going to do some of your reading outside of this lecture. So the previous slide really, and muscle hypertrophy, I appreciate doesn't explicitly relate to strength. So let's get back onto strength and some of the methods that we can use in order to increase our strength. So when we talk about different methods of training, 3 may spring to mind, and these are pretty straightforward. We have resistance machines, bodyweight exercises, and free weight exercises. Now, when it comes to your level 2 examination, you are expected to show proficiency in each one of these areas. So a good knowledge of the different resistance machines that are available and the techniques that you should be completing, bodyweight exercises, press-ups, sit-ups, chin-ups, pull-ups, and things like this, and then free weight exercises all allow for you to play around with some of those variables in order to bring about increases in strength and also strength endurance. Of course, you'll learn more about these exercises when it comes to the practical element of your level 2, but again, these are just identified as key methods which can be used to improve strength. So when it comes to the physiological adaptations of strength training, there is quite an array, and they range from neural adaptations to mechanical adaptations and even soft tissue adaptations which occur. So let's go through just some of these, and once again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just something that provides you some perspective to look at the benefits of strength training. So the first one is that we get an increase in muscle fiber recruitment. Generally, that your average Joe can innervate around 33% of their total muscle fibers when contracting to produce force. Through strength training, we increase that amount and therefore are able to use more of our muscle fibers, which of course the consequence of that is that we're going to be able to produce more force. If we're able to innervate more muscle fibers, then of course, at least the potential to produce more force is there. So in a gym setting, this of course means that we're going to be able to overcome more resistance and therefore be able to push more weight in that process. One of the byproducts of strength training, of course, is muscle hypertrophy. So whether we're training for maximal strength or strength endurance, as we've discussed at length now, we can induce a hypertrophic response. So just as a reminder, hypertrophy relates to the increased size of the muscle, and this is often referred to as the muscle CSA. So CSA stands for cross-sectional area, and this just is a very simple way of measuring the size of the muscle to ensure that hypertrophy is taking place. Although CSA doesn't overtly contribute to an increase in maximal strength, generally the bigger the muscle is, therefore we have more muscle fiber recruitment, and at least the potential to be stronger with a larger muscle is apparent. Of course, though, strength is a neural process, so this is the brain switching on those individual muscle fibers, but nonetheless, hypertrophy would contribute to an increased force potential. Increase in bone density, so soft tissue adaptations also occur. It's not only muscle which is an adaptive tissue, bone is also an adaptive tissue, and as we put it under load through strength training, there is an increase in the bone density, so there is a much reduced chance of injury, fracture and things like that. So increase in bone density is one of the soft tissue adaptations. And of course, surrounding the bones, the muscles, we have tendons and ligaments. So as you're well aware, a tendon attaches muscle to bone and a ligament attaches bone to bone. And with strength training, we can increase the integrity of both our tendon and our ligament, which again contributes to a reduced chance of injury. So that brings us to a close on the principles exercise of fitness and health relating to strength and strength endurance. So just to conclude that, there is a workbooklet which is on the link below. If you click on that, download it, and then complete the task relating to strength on the definitions, the types of training, the training protocols, and the adaptations, then that will serve as a nice reminder to prepare you for the examination. In addition to that, there is also some helpful videos which can help you better understand strength and the strength adaptations. So if you click on that link, that will provide some visual entertainment for you relating to strength training, and also a practice assessment to help you prepare for your exam. All three are underneath the lecture slides. You can click on the link. So I'll leave you to that. Good luck, and we'll see you over at the next video. Goodbye.